So right here, it says at the bottom of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, Yesh choresh telem echod v'chayovim olev mishum shmona lav. Number one, the Torah tells us in Parshas Ki Teitzei, Lo sachrosh b'shor uv'chamor yachdav. This kind of klaya behavior, but not kilayim in the sense of breeding two species, but of working simultaneously with two species is a violation of lo sachrosh b'shor v'chamor yachdav, and therefore hachoresh b'shor v'chamor, and he's doing the charisha using two animals, an ox and a donkey. He gets malchus for that violation of lo sachrosh. Number two, vehem, it happens that the shor and the chamor are mukdashim. Now, in the case of shor, you could have what's called kodesh mizbeach. A shor is brought on the mizbeach. And in the case of chamor, we have a different kind of kodesh, which is called kodesh bedek habayis. But either way, in both cases, he violates a lav of lo savod bivchar shorecha, which means that you're not allowed to enjoy the benefit and work with an animal that has the status of hegdik, whether it's kodesh bedek habayis, which generates an Isur Me'ilah, whether it's kodesh mizbeach in the case of a shor, where you violate the lav lo savod b'chor shorecha, and therefore he gets malchus for violating that law. Now, what was he putting into the ground as he was threshing the ground? It was kilayim b'keren. In other words, he was now pushing into the ground two seeds. One was a gefen, and the other was zroim. Therefore, he gets malchus for lo sizra karmacha kilayim. Very clever. Then on the top of Mem Zayin on the base, it was also Shvius. And the Torah says about Shvius, Sodcha lo tizra, you're not allowed to be choresh or zorea your fields on Shvius. That's a lot. Oh, here's the punchline for our sugya, ubi yontif. The Torah says, Kol malacha lo savod, Kol malacha savod lo sasu, and he did a malach of charisha on yontif. Next, he was a Kohen, and he was a Nazir. And where was this Charisha being done? It was being done, of all places, in a graveyard, a Beis HaTumah. The Torah says at the beginning of Parshas Emor, Lenefesh lo yitama bi'amav, addressing the Kohanim. And in Parshas Naso, the Torah says, "Kol yimei nizol Hashem," and Nazir is a nizol Hashem. Ve'al nefesh meis lo yava. So he's not allowed to have contact with a dead person. Wow. Now, it's a little bit of a problem here because these last two violations have nothing to do with the charisha. Even if he stepped into a Beis HaKvoros and he's a Kohen Nazir, he violates those two laws. But in any event, we have an overlap of 8 different lavim. Let's just review the 8 different lavim. Number 1, kloi behema, that's shor v'chamor yachtov. Number 2, molacha b'kodesh mizbeach, and that's with regard to the shor, because he's working a shor of kodesh mizbeach, and the Torah says you're not allowed to do molacha with a korban. 3, it's also the chamor that he's working with, which is, as we said before, bedek habayis, and that's an Isur Me'ilah. 4, he's also planting klaya kerem. 5, he's planting on Shvius. 6, he is doing a malach of charish on Yontiv. And 7 and 8 is Kohen and Nazir in a base HaKohen. 8 lav. So now Rav Chizda turns to Rabban, he says, wait a minute, V'i Amrin Hoil, according to you, that there's a principle of Hoil, I can theoretically imagine potentially a situation where he needs the Harisha as part of Ochel Nefesh. How's that? I mean, unless you could grow something within an hour, how could you imagine such a thing? So Rav Chisda is very creative, and he says the following: He shouldn't get malchus for charisha on Yontiv. Hoel v'chazi l'kisi dam tzipor. You're allowed to shecht birds on Yontiv. Shchita is a classic malacha of ochel nefesh. And the law is, the Torah requires that after you shecht a bird, you have to cover its dam. I remember this was before the pandemic. We went to watch kaparas, and sometimes after kaparas, if you hang around, they shech the birds, they shech the chickens, and that was the first time in my life I remember that I made a bracha on kisi adam. He let me do the kisi adam. But now he needs the ground. The ground is solid before the charisha, and after the charisha, he loosens up the ground, and as a result, he can take these this ground that's soft, and he could use it to cover the dam. Now, if that be the case, then the charish itself is considered l'tzorech ochel nefesh. I mean, it happens to be that he's being chorish, but the mice itself of charisha is now for the purpose, again, in hoil, within the context of hoil, for the purpose of kisi adam. Now, we have to also here mention a sugya at the very beginning of Masechta Yevamos, and that's called Ese Docha Losase. Now, what happens is the following: that there's a mitzvah of Kisi Adam, and the Torah prohibits Charisha as one of the malachos on Yontif. But the essay of Kisi Adam overrides the Iser of Charisha. So Rav Chisda says to Rabbi Bishleim Lididi, he has no interest and no intention of shechting a bird. He has no birds. He's not a shochet, and certainly he's not going to do kisi adam. But according to you, Rabbi, that we have to take into consideration theoretical possibilities through hoil, then theoretically birds might come and a shochet might come, and he needs ground for kisui, and for the sake of the mitzvah of kisui, we will override the Isar Charish of Yontif, and in the context of Hoil, then it comes out that this Charisha is not a violation of Meleches Yontif based on Hoil. The case that this Mishnah in Makos is addressing is a case of a certain kind of stone, which is called mikur zolos. They are very soft stones, such that you can actually plant something and it will grow, because otherwise he's not chayav for klaya karim, etc. But on the other hand, you cannot use those kind of stones because of their shape for kisi adam. So this is our goal. Our goal is to find a hechatimsa where it's possible to do zriya, but it's impossible to use that ground of the charisha for kisi adam. That's the case of avonim mikur zolos. And now the Gemara says the following. Wait a second. Why is it that mikur zolos are unfit for kisui? And the answer is because they are still in a solid state. And you need afar that is soft ground in order to cover and fulfill the mitzvah kisi adam. So the Gemara immediately asks, Ruyos l'kocham, why can't he crush them and then use that to cover the dam of the tzipor? And again, if you'll tell me that Kedisha itself is also on Yontiv, but we're going to say essay docha losas, and for the sake of the essay of kisi adam, we're going to permit you to do Kedisha. And I'm already giving you a little bit of a preview of what's coming around. The Gemara says Kedisha b'Yontiv mishari. There is a malacha called malachas tochen, and tochen grinding is also on yontif. And that's based on a principle of the famous Yerushalmi that on yontif you're only allowed for the sake of ochel nefesh lisha v'elech, from the point of lisha and on. So that again, we're going to allow you charisha within the context of hoil, not because of ochel nefesh, but because of esei dochel losaseh. If that charisha is necessary to get access to ground to offer for the sake of kisi adam, for the greatest sake of kisi adam, we're going to override charisha. And the same is going to be true of Ketisha. Ketisha is Meleches Tochen, which is earlier in the Sidur de Pas, before Lisha, and it's not allowed on Yontif, and it's not included under Ochel Nefesh. So if that be the case, the Gemara now is of the opinion that for some reason, Esei Dochel Lotas will not apply to Ketisha. And if it's Avonim Mikrozolos, then the Gemara is rejecting Rav Chizda's kasha by saying, well, Re'uyos Lakotcha, but the Gemara is saying, no, that Ketisha is a Meleches Tochen, and we cannot allow it on Yantif, and hence we have to quiet down Rav Chizda. But why is that so? I mean, why don't we say Esei Dochalosa like we did with Charisha and apply that to Ketisha? So there's a long, long discussion about this. The Rashbam, Rabbeinu David, the Chidushei Aran, and somehow it seems that in Esei Dochalosa, there has to be some sort of direct relationship between the malacha that you're overriding, the losasa, and the essay of, in this case, Kisi Adam. And the Rishonim are trying to work out how is it that there is this direct relationship. And another element that comes to this equation is what's called Malach Shein Tzrich L'Gufa. And in the case of Charisha, it's called a Malach Shein Tzrich L'Gufa if he needs the offer for Kitza, but not in the case of Ketisha. So B'li Neder, if we have time, that's something that would be more for an Ian Shia, but the Gemara assumes now that certainly Ketisha would be Aser on Yog. And therefore, if we are talking about Avonim Zolos, then Rav Chizda, you have no cash over here, because there's no possibility, even theoretically, of fulfilling the mitzvah of Kisi Adam as a result of this Charisha, because the ground and the stones in which he's doing the Charisha, unless you could grind them, and we're assuming now you can't grind them in Yontiv, could never be fit for Kisi Adam. So now the Gemara, in a sense, is going to defend the offense, meaning now the Gemara is going to defend Rav Chizda's kasha of why not apply Hoil. And even in the case of Avonim Mikurzolos, which require Ketisha in order to validate them for the purpose of Kisi Adam, even so, he can do that on Yom. How so? Re'uyos l'kocham kel achar yad. Now, when you do a malacha in an unusual way, kel achar yad, then because of the principle called meleches machsheves, it is not also midaraisa, it's only also midrabbanan. And therefore, says Rav Chizda, if you're right, Rabbi, we're going to apply the principle of Hoil, then he should not be chayiv for Charisha, even in this case of Avonim, because you could, as a result of this Charisha, be Makayim the mitzvah of Kisi Adam by doing Ketisha Kel Achar Yad. And as far as the mitzvah of Kisi Adam, if he has that mitzvah on Yontiv, that's going to override the Isa D'Rabbanan of Ketisha Liachar Yad. So the Gemara answers again to defend Rabbah bit Sudma. We're talking about a large boulder, a large stone, and it's not possible to grind down the stone and make it roy for Kisi Adam. So again, but our goal is to find a situation where it's not Roy Lakisi Adam, but it is Roy for Zriya and Charisha, and he violates Klai Akerem, for example. So Gemara asks Tzudma bar Zriya. How are you telling me that we're talking in this Mishnah in Makis about a Chetimtza of Tzudma, and he's violating this Zriya? You can't be Zorei on a boulder. Our answer is Tzudma milamala, the Ofar Tichoach milamata. The case is where the ground level is karga, tsudma. It's got a boulder on top of the ground level, but below it, there's afar, soft ground that is suitable for planting. And therefore, with this charisha, he is able to allow to penetrate the zroim, the seeds, below the surface of the tsudma, of this large boulder, in such a way that the seeds now go into the offer tichoach, which is the soft ground below, that's hidden below the surface of the tsudma, and therefore he's chayav for meleches choresh, because he does a charish on the upper level, on the surface level of this great boulder, this sela, but it's eino roy, it's not suitable for kisi adam. So the Gemara says, no, that can't be. Why? Typically, mishum offer tichoach. Even if he's doing a charisha on a boulder, we could still apply the heter choil, because he can use the offer tichoach. Now, how does he get to the offer tichoach? How does he gain access to the soft ground in order to fulfill the mitzvah of kisa? He's got to do the charisha on the sela, and as a result, he exposes the offer tichuach below the sela. So once again, he needs the charisha in order to fulfill the mitzvah of kitzi adam. And we're back to question square one. We should apply the principle of hoil, and how can he get malchus for charisha on yontiv when it's very possible in this particular set of circumstances that the charisha will facilitate the mitzvah of kitzi adam. Ella Omar Marbar of Ashi. Since this question of Rav Chizda is so powerful, we have to really add another element into the equation, betina. We're talking about a case in this Mishnah of a person who's choresh betina. Tina is more or less the same word as tit, and we're talking about a kind of a soft, muddy substance, which lends itself to zriya, but could never be used, that kind of mud, for kisi adam. Gemara says, "V'tino bar zriyahu." Can you really plant seeds in mud? The Gemara answers, "Be mitunta." Mitunta is a kind of a ground that's soft. Again, you can't use it for kisi adam because it never can become ofar. The Torah requires ofar for kisi adam, but it is possible to break it down in such a way that these different clumps will be softened and he can achieve his planting. And therefore, in such a case where there's no possibility of accessing offer for kisi adam, he's violating meleches harisha. Let me just take 1 minute, if it's okay with the olam. I think we're doing okay on the clock today, so that I just want to read to you what he says over here. He says the Mishnah refers to wet mud, which is fit for sowing, yet unfit for covering blood. That's what he says over here in the English translation. Offer tikuach, he says soft soil, so that's good. That's what we had. Sudma is rocky ground. Okay, I said it was a boulder. He calls it rocky ground. Now, how does he translate avonim mikurzolos? he calls it a field with pointed stones, which are not fit for covering blood. So the Gemara objects, but they are fit for crushing it into fine pieces and then used for covering the blood. So the Gemara says crushing is not permitted on Yont. He doesn't talk at all here about Esse Docha Losasa, as far as I can tell. Okay, but maybe we'd see some chidushim here in the English translation, but I think we pretty much did a good job. Esve Abaye is going to raise an objection to Rabbah from, again, a brisa, which is so typical, as I said before, the methodology of Chazal to find a single action that generates multiple averos. Now here we have to divide up into two categories. He's going to get 5 sets of malchus, but they really hide a distinction between two categories. Of the 5, a number of them, we'll count them soon, have to do with the bishul itself. Number 1, he's mavashal giran noshe with cholav, so he's got milchiks and fleishiks. Number 2, he's being mavashal on yontif. Now we're going to add 3 averos because of the achila. He eats the product of giran noshe with cholav. So loka mishum mavashal gid beyontif. So first of all, he gets malchus for bishul on yontif. Number 2, loka mishum ochel gid, he ate the giran noshe. Number 3, loka mishum mavashal basa b'cholav. So he's got an overlap of 2 violations of bishul. One is basa b'cholav, the other is yontif. Next, loka mishum ochel basa b'cholav. So now he has achilas giran noshe. He has achilas basa b'cholav. We're all told 4. What's the magic number 5? Veloka mishum havara. The brisa says that by lighting the fire for the purpose of bishul, he violates the malach of havara, which is one of the malachos that's prohibited on yontif. Now, normally we can light a fire l'tzorach chol nefesh, but here, when he is lighting a fire for the purpose of eating basa b'cholav of giran noshe, nonetheless, that's not called l'tzorach chol nefesh, and there the havara itself becomes a lav, a malacha doraisa of havara. Amri in Hoyos Abai asks his kash on Rabbah, is havara lo l'chayv ho v'chazi le'litzarko? There are many possibilities if we're looking at potential for how he would use l'tzarko chol nefesh, this havara. He's burning a fire, and any number of possible scenarios, he might want to cook a tavshil on this fire, a tavshil of heter, of kosher food. So therefore, we should apply the principle of hoil. How would he violate and get malchus for the malacha of havara? Amalei. So Rabbah responds to Abaye, apik havara. You have to change the girsa here in this brisa. Remove the word havara. The isle in its place, put giran noshe shel nevela, which means that we're not talking about the Isur Bishul here, because we're taking out Havara from the list. We're talking about an additional Isur Achila. Not only is he eating giran noshe that's basa b'cholav, he's also eating nevela. Fine. So he gets another set of malchus for eating nevela. So Abaye asks, wait a minute. You're upsetting the balance here between the Isur Bishul and the Isur Achila. Why? Because if we have the girsa as we originally had it before Rabbah changed it, namely for Sreifas Chametz, for Birur, then we line it up that he has, let's go over it, he has 3 violations for Bishul and 2 for Achila. Let's go over it one more time. He's got Bishul basa b'cholav, he's got Bishul on Yontiv, and he's got Havara. On the other side, for Achila, he has two, making up the magic number 5 here in this Mishnah. He's got Achilas Gid Anoche and Achilas Basa B'Chola. But if you take out Sreifa, the Havara, and in its place you plug in Nevela, now you've shifted the balance. And you've got 3 violations of Achila, that's Basa B'Chola, Gid Anoche, and Nevela, and 2 violations of Bishul. Bishul Basa B'Chola and Bishul B'Yontif. He says, V'atani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia says that how do we divvy up these 2 categories of Achila and Bishul in the 5? Lokim Shtaim al Achila. There are 2 violations of Achila. Let's get Anosh and Basa B'Chola. V'shalosh al Bishula. He has lit a fire. He cooks that which you're not allowed to eat. And he cooks Basa B'Chola. So we got 2 for Achila and 3 for Bishul, which is Rabbi Chia's understanding of the Brisa. But V'isa, if you're going to take out Havara, and in its place you're going to plug in Nevela, then Shalosh al Achilas to be boile. He's only violating 2 Isurim for Bishul and 3 for Achila, because now he's got Achila of Gid Anoshe plus Basa B'Chola and add Nevela to boot. You've upset the balance. Now Rabbi has to backtrack. Ella, but rather Apik Havara V'Ayil Atze Muktzah. I'm going to need to find a substitute for Havara, because again, it might be Litzarko if he needs to cook something on this fire, and that's Hoya. But in its place, put in Atze Muktzah. And burning Atze Muktzah is part of the Bishul, so we fulfill Rabbi Chia's interpretation of Lokim Shtaim al Chilos v'Shalosh al Bishulo, and he violates an Isa Doraisa. Did you ever hear such a thing? By burning Atze Muktzah, by benefiting from Atze Muktzah, he violates a Torah law. And Hoil is not going to help over here, because what benefit is he allowed to get by burning Atze Muktzah? He's not allowed to burn Atze Muktzah. That's a Doraisa. And now we have a third on Bishul. Now the Gemara in Shabbos says that it was during the time of Nehemiah that they made a gzera of Tiltul Muktzah. How does that square with our Gemara here? The Gemara is assuming now, again, the Gemara is going to question this premise, but right now the Gemara is assuming that Muktzah is Doraisa. So the Chassam Sofer says that Tiltul Muktzah is the Rabbanan that was instituted at the time of Nehemiah, but Shimush b'Muktzah, Anav Muktzah, Achil of Muktzah, all of those were Doraisa, because the Torah says Ve'echinu es asher yaviu, that you have to prepare for that which you will benefit from. On Erev Shabbos you have to prepare, and if it wasn't Mukhan, it wasn't prepared, then it's awesome Doraisa. Tiltul Muktzah is only a drabana, and that doesn't need hachana on a doraisa. But if you want to benefit from the muktzah, like in this case, he's burning the muktzah in order to use it as fuel for his tavshil, that is an isa doraisa. But both say this one line here, which is tucked away on Daf Mem Zayin of Beis in Masechet Pesachim, has tremendous repercussions. The sugi of muktzah, as you know, is a gigantic sugi. You remember in Masechet Shabbos, we divide up the entire Masechet into 3 parts, one of which was muktzah. And now it just tucked away here in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. The Gemara is assuming that muktzah is doraisa. Abai questions this premise. Between muktzah doraisa, so Rabbi says in the Torah requires that on Erev Shabbos you prepare for that which you're going to enjoy on Shabbos. And these eitzim which he was using were never prepared on Erev Shabbos. They were never designated before Shabbos, or in this case before Yom Tov. And therefore without achana, it's awesome in Torah. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. It's not enough just to tell me Veichinu es asher yaviu. That doesn't give you Malchus. For Malchus, we need a violation of Allah. So the Gemara says, the Torah is now telling me that if you use muktzah and you violate the principle of Eichinu es asher yaviu, you are violating a malacha. We have a new category of malacha. Again, how is this going to square with the sugyas that there are 39 malachas and no more? I really don't know. Very difficult. That we're adding a whole new category of a malacha. Now, Abai is going to get back into the boxing rink, and he's going to try to undermine undermine Rabbah. Even if Rabbah, you can somehow, with this combination of Ve'echinu es asher yaviu as a gili milsa and kol malach lo sasu, come up with a justification for your presentation that muktzah is doraisa. But you yourself denied that muktzah is doraisa. Amalei Abai says to Rav, Atu di Amrit, you yourself told us the following. Boy, mi name Rav Chizda. I want to ask the following question of Chizda. V'amrilei, others say, boy, mi name Rav Huna. Avi se me'afar. On Yontif, he brought into the Azara a lamb. The lamb was grazing from the grass way out there, miles and miles away. And therefore the seh was not prepared for use on Yontif, and it's muktzah. And now he brings it into the Azara and shchato, and he shechts it for the tamid of the carbon tamid of Yontif. And you asked the question, Mao. And V'at Amrlon Allah, and you quoted a pasuk in Yechezkel to prove. Well, again, I'm sort of skipping one step, but at the end, I just want to give you the end of the tunnel. It's going to be that the carbon itself is kosher, only because muktzah is the rabbanon. So again, this seh came from the afar, and the afar is a place that's way out. It was not designated for use on Yontif, therefore it's muktzah. And now he wants to shecht it as a carbon tamid, and it's muktzah. And you yourself, Rabbah, took the position that the carbon is kosher because muktzah is only birabbanon. How can you go on record as to say that muktzah is deoraisa? Now, Rabosa, we have to make a quick decision. And I think I've already made the decision by looking at my watch. We have 7 minutes officially left. I'm going to take those 7 minutes to learn through this drasha, this very, very long and complicated drasha of a pasuk in Yechezkel, from which we learn all the yisodos, all the fundamentals about what can be brought on the mizbeach as a carbon. The pasuk says in 45, the 45th parak of Yechezkel. I'm going to read the whole pasuk. Every single word in this pasuk of Yechezkel is going to teach us another halacha about karbanos. It says v'seh achas min atzon min amasayim mimashke Yisrael. Seh. The word seh indicates an animal that could be either male or female. V'lo b'char. A b'char, which has its own kedusha, cannot be brought as a carbon. In other words, let's say I say harei alai ola, I can't point to a b'char. The b'char is excluded from the word seh because b'char, by definition, has to be a male and cannot be a female. Then the pasuk says achas, and that's coming to exclude below meiser. Meiser means that we gather together 10 animals in a corral and we let 9 go out. The 10th is called kedushas maser. So the word achas means an animal that stands on its own. But maser can never stand on its own. There's no such thing as calling something maser unless you have 10 in a group. So you cannot use a behema of maser behema, as a carbon. Minatzon, That's the next phrase in this pasuk of Yechezkel. Velo apalgas. It means that the Torah requires one of two things for a korban. It's either a keves, or an ayil. A keves is within the first 12 months since it's born, and an ayil is after 13 months, meaning a year plus a month, and then it becomes an ayil. In between, when it's 12 months but not yet 13 months, it's called a palgas. And a palgas is excluded because the Torah says minatzon. And minatzon means it's got to fit into one or two categories. It's either a keves or it's an ayil. And here we turn to Daf Memches Omen Aleph. Then the pasuk goes on and says, min ha-masayim. Has no meaning whatsoever. There's no pshuta shel mikra, min ha-masayim, from the 200. What's going on over here? So the Gemara derives from this, mimoser shtei me'ot shenishtayru b'bar. And the issue here is what's called niskei hayayin, and he takes yayin out of a bar, a big cistern, and mixed into that yayin for the purpose of the chasim, of the sachim, is yayin shel orla. So we have orla now that's mixed in with yayin shel heter. And now we need that in the bar there should be a ratio, there should be 200 of a volume, 200 pieces or parts, and negative that one part of orla. And orla is only betela b'masayim. That's half of a percentage point. Mikanli orla should betela b'masayim. Next, the last part of the pasuk is the most important for our purposes. Mimashke Yisrael, min amuta liYisrael. Elsewhere it says min amuta b'ficha. You're only allowed to bring on the mizbeach that which you yourself would be allowed to eat. Mikan obru ein mevim nesachin min hateva. If you have yayin before you are mafresh trumas of maisros, that yayin is possible in mizbeach. It cannot be used as nesachin because it's not mutar meficha. It's asur midin tevel. Yochel, I might think, lo yavi min hamukta. Let's say you have an animal that was not designated for use, neither on Yom Tov nor on Shabbos, and it's mukta. Should we exclude it under the din of Mimashke Yisrael because you're not allowed to eat mukta? Or Marta, no. Ma tevel miyuchat she'isuro begufo garam lo af kol she'isuro begufo garam yotzim mukta she'en isuro gufo garam lo el isur davar acher garam. The isur achil of mukta is not because mukta is inherently asur like tevel, but rather it's because it happens to be Shabbos or Yom Tov. And therefore, the Brisa explicitly says that you're allowed to be makriv mukta on the Mizbeach. Now, how could you be makriv mukta on the Mizbeach if, according to you, Rabbah, mukta is an Isur Doraisa? And if it's an Isur Doraisa, then it's no better or worse than Tevel, and it's excluded under Mimashke Yisrael. Isur mukta Doraisa, Mali Isur Gufa, Umali Isur Davar Acher. How could it be that you can take a korban that's mukta, like your case of the seh that came from the Efer, came from far away, and be machshered for a korban? It's not minamashke mimuta beficha. It's not muta beficha. It's also midaraisa. That itself proves that you yourself, Rabbah, will have to take the position, as we'll see tomorrow, that mukta is only dirabana. And if that be the case, we're going to have to find another substitute for explaining why, as we said before, in the context of this brisa, havara, burning, could appear as one of the chiyuvei malchus when you hold from hoil, and it's always possible that its havara will be needed for some tzorech. So you're going to tell me, well, he's burning atze mukta. That's not a doraisa, that's a drabana. And this brisa is listing 5 chiyuvei malchus, and it's impossible that havara on yontiv would engender a chiyuv malchus because of hoil it's always possible that you'll need the sreifa. So here, at this point, the Gemara rejects the possibility that the Havara here, the Sreifa, was Atze Muktzah, because Atze Muktzah would never generate an Isa Malacha and a Chiyuv Malchus. So we're going to stop here, and we're up to the word V'od, and even though we're sort of in the middle of a sugya, but we have to leave some work for tomorrow, right? Daf Yomi requires a new daf, and tomorrow's daf is Memches, and therefore we're going to pick it up tomorrow from the word V'od, which is the second of the wide lines. So let me bid you a wonderful, wonderful day.